There is a person in your life who never yells at you. They don't threaten you. They don't insult you. They don't do anything that would clearly look wrong if someone else were watching. Instead, they get quiet. They look down. They say something like, "No, it's fine. Don't worry about it." And you feel it immediately. Something in your chest. A pull. You didn't do anything wrong, and yet you're already apologizing. That reaction happened before you had time to think. That's the mechanism. Not what they said, not the silence. Your own conscience, working for someone else. And they found it long before this conversation. The instinct is to smooth it over, reach toward the warmth, fix it. That instinct is exactly what they're counting on. In the next 25 minutes, 5 rules, built from Machiavelli's clearest observations about emotional leverage and the modern psychology that confirms every one of them. The last rule changes what the first 4 actually mean. Drop this. I know the difference between real and manufactured guilt. This knowledge is for protection, not destruction. Use it to defend yourself, not to harm innocent people. The goal is to understand the game, not to become the villain. For 500 years, Niccolò Machiavelli watched the most dangerous minds in Florence, in Rome, in the courts of Europe, and he noticed something that almost no one else was willing to say out loud. Power almost never looks like power. It looks like hurt. The prince who controlled through fury was predictable. You could see him coming. You could prepare. But the advisor who grew quiet when you disagreed? The ally who made you feel, without a single accusation, that you had failed them? That person didn't need armies. They had something more efficient. They had your conscience working for them. What Machiavelli understood, and what most people never learn until it's years too late, is this. The most durable form of control is not force. It is a reflex you cannot turn off. A feeling that arrives before your reasoning does. A guilt that functions like gravity, invisible, constant, exhausting to push against. And once someone learns how to trigger it, they don't need to do much else. Rule 1. Manufactured guilt versus real guilt. Before we talk about how this works, it matters who is doing it, because the counter is different for each type. The first type is unconscious. They learned this pattern as children from parents who withdrew emotionally when disappointed. They are not doing this deliberately. They genuinely feel hurt. These people are often the hardest to leave and the most able to change. The second type is semi-conscious. They know something works. They feel the shift in your behavior, but they've never fully articulated it to themselves. When confronted, they react with confusion, then defensiveness, then sometimes recognition. The third type is fully deliberate. They know precisely what they are doing. They have refined it across multiple relationships. The guilt is a tool deployed with timing and precision. These people do not change under relational pressure. The only effective response is structural distance. Recognize which type you're dealing with, because the counter differs. Machiavelli once observed, "Men judge by appearances, for sight is given to all, feeling to few." What this means today is most people never examine their own guilt closely enough to ask whether it's actually warranted. They feel it. That feeling feels real. So they act on it. And that is the entire architecture of the trap. In the 1960s, Stanley Milgram ran a series of experiments that changed how we understand compliance. Subjects administered what they believed were painful electric shocks to strangers. Not because they were ordered to, but because a calm authority figure simply implied, "Please continue." No threat, no punishment, just the gentle pressure of implied expectation. 65% of participants went all the way. Milgram's conclusion? Implied disappointment generates compliance that direct orders cannot. Not because people are weak, but because the conscience is designed to respond to the signals of others. That design is what's being exploited. Apply this. Real guilt has a specific shape. It arrives after a specific action. It points at something concrete. It feels proportional. And it dissipates when you make amends. Manufactured guilt is different in every dimension. It arrives without a specific trigger. It is vague. You just feel like you failed somehow. It is disproportionate. And making amends doesn't end it. It escalates it. Have you ever apologized to someone, sincerely, and felt the weight get heavier, not lighter? Real guilt resolves when accountability happens. Manufactured guilt survives the apology. The named insight is what I call the guilt reflex. Every person has one. A conditioned response that fires when we sense someone around us is unhappy. In healthy relationships, this reflex keeps us accountable. In the hands of someone who understands it, it becomes the most efficient lever ever built. You cannot shut the reflex off, but you can learn to examine it before acting on it. Ask yourself 3 questions before you move. 1. What specific action am I guilty of? 2. Is this reaction proportional to that action? 3. Have similar apologies resolved this in the past? If you cannot answer 1, if 2 is clearly no, if 3's answer is also no, you are not looking at your conscience. You are looking at someone else's instrument. You think you understand the mechanism, but that's only the first layer. Because the real trap isn't the guilt itself. It's what happens after. Rule 2. The guilt loop. And most people never realize it's happening until the relationship has already reorganized itself around it. Machiavelli once observed, "He who becomes master of a city accustomed to freedom and does not destroy it may expect to be destroyed by it." What this means today is, some systems, once activated, do not rest. They require constant maintenance. The most destructive part isn't the bad moments, it's the good ones. They're what keep you inside. A guilt loop is a system that never fully resolves. You apologize, they soften, briefly. The warmth returns, briefly. And then something new triggers the weight again, and you are back at the beginning. This is not confusion, it is architecture. In 1959, B.F. Skinner demonstrated what he called intermittent reinforcement, a reward schedule in which the reward appears unpredictably, not consistently. Animals on this schedule don't stop seeking the reward when it disappears. They intensify their effort. They become more dedicated to the behavior that occasionally produces relief, not less. The findings have been replicated hundreds of times. Now, apply this to a relationship where warmth returns only occasionally. Only when you've sufficiently demonstrated compliance. Only when you've apologized long enough. The warmth is not a reward. It is a maintenance schedule. Some people spend years trying to earn warmth that was never meant to become permanent. Have you ever felt relieved after an argument? Not because anything was resolved, but simply because the coldness stopped? That relief is not healing. That relief is the loop resetting. The exit is not a better apology. The exit is recognizing that no apology ends this, because ending it was never the design. The warmth feels real because, in the moment, it is. That is the cruelest structural detail of this pattern. And gratitude does not examine the conditions that produced it. When you find yourself in the same emotional position, stop. Don't reach toward the warmth. Observe the loop instead. Name it. I am in the loop again. Naming it doesn't end it immediately, but it does something the loop cannot survive for long. It makes you a witness instead of a participant. And most people who make it out of the loop do one thing differently. Not a dramatic exit. Not a confrontation. They simply begin to ask a different question. Not, how do I get back to the warmth? But, what would actually need to be different for the loop to stop? Those are not the same question. And most people never reach the second one. And this is where it gets worse. Rule 3. DARVO. Machiavelli once observed, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him." What this means today is, pay attention to what happens the moment accountability enters the room. Not what the person claims, not what they intend, what they do when the mirror turns toward them. DARVO. Defend, attack, reverse, victim and offender. This sequence was formally identified by psychologist Jennifer Freyd in 1997, but Machiavelli would have recognized every step in the court of Cesare Borgia. In the winter of 1502, Borgia invited his most powerful commanders to a private dinner. They expected negotiation. Within hours, each had been arrested. Within days, most were dead. The invitation framed Borgia as the aggrieved party seeking reconciliation. Those who came were portrayed as the aggressors. He reversed the moral position of every participant before anyone could analyze it. What Borgia did with armies, skilled manipulators do with words. The sequence goes like this. You raise a concern. They immediately defend. I can't believe you think that about me. Then they attack, redirecting toward something you did, something from 3 months ago. And then the reversal. By the end of the conversation, they are the one who has been wronged. You owe the apology. Have you ever started a conversation trying to address something that hurt you, and ended it apologizing for having brought it up at all? If a specific face came to mind just now, don't move past that. That's not a coincidence. That's information. The terrifying part is not that they lie. It's that after enough repetitions, you stop trusting your own memory faster than you trust their version. DARVO works because it moves faster than your ability to track it. Each step arrives before you've processed the one before it. And because you entered with genuine concern, with genuine vulnerability, you are moving slowly. They are moving with precision. The counter is not to match their speed. The counter is to stop. I'm going to need a moment. Not a dramatic pause, just a full stop. When DARVO runs at speed, it operates below awareness. At a slower pace, each component becomes visible. You recognize the defend, the attack, and when the reversal arrives, you see it for what it is, a repositioning. Not evidence, not truth, a move. I'm going to need a moment is not weakness. It is the only move that breaks the sequence. Rule 4. The preemptive strike. Machiavelli once observed, wounds ought to be inflicted all at once so that, being tasted less, they offend less. What this means today is, the most efficient way to neutralize a threat is to move before the threat becomes organized. DARVO responds to accountability. The preemptive strike eliminates it before it can form. When someone accuses you of exactly what they are doing, before you've had any chance to observe it, name it, or raise it yourself. They accuse you of being manipulative. They accuse you of always making them feel guilty. They accuse you of being controlling, inconsiderate, emotionally unavailable. And because you are a person who takes accountability seriously, you pause. You consider it. You wonder, could they be right? That wondering is the window. The preemptive accusation is designed to open it. The preemptive accusation is most effective against people with high self-awareness, people who actually want to be good, people who are willing to examine themselves. Because when someone accuses you of exactly what they're doing, you don't immediately say, "That's projection." You say, "Let me think about that honestly." And they know you will. Before his enemies could accuse him, Richelieu accused them first. In 1630, facing a coalition powerful enough to remove him from court, the cardinal presented the king with evidence of their treason before they could present evidence of his. He called it, in private correspondence, the only defense that also destroys. The case was built. The momentum was his. By the time they organized, the framing was already complete. When was the last time you were accused of doing the very thing that was being done to you? The counter is not defensiveness. The counter is a precise question. Can you give me a specific example? Not as confrontation, as genuine inquiry. Vague accusations produce vague guilt. Specific accountability requires specific evidence. If they can, listen. If they can't, you have your information. Most people who are genuinely trying to communicate can answer that question. Most people running a preemptive strike cannot. Rule 5. Guilt immunity. Some people never realize they've been trained by guilt until every important decision already passes through another person first. Everything so far has been useless if one thing doesn't change. Machiavelli once wrote, "The one who adapts his policy to the times prospers, and likewise that the one whose policy clashes with the demands of the times does not." The first 4 rules are weapons. They are real, they are effective, and understanding them changes how you see every difficult relationship. But without this 5th, they are tools without a doctrine. Here is the doctrine. Guilt immunity is not the absence of guilt. That would require the absence of conscience. And the absence of conscience is not strength. It is a different kind of prison. Guilt immunity is the cultivated ability to hold the feeling without immediately moving on it. The average guilt reflex takes approximately 3 seconds from trigger to behavioral response. 3 seconds from the sigh, the silence, the "no, it's fine," to your reach toward apology. In those 3 seconds, no analysis has occurred, no evaluation of proportionality, no recognition of the loop, or DARVO, or preemptive framing. 3 seconds to a behavioral response that was engineered months ago. The people most vulnerable to weaponized guilt are usually the people trying hardest to be good. Their conscience is highly calibrated, their reflex is fast, and someone patient enough learned exactly how to touch it. Guilt immunity is what happens when you extend those 3 seconds. Not forever, not into coldness, not into indifference to genuine harm, but long enough to ask, is this my conscience speaking, or someone else's instrument playing my notes? In 1513, Machiavelli, stripped of his position, tortured, exiled to his farm, began writing The Prince. He had every reason for bitterness. And yet, in his letters from that period, one thing emerges: clarity. Not happiness, clarity. He wrote, "I cannot help but think about it, and as I keep thinking, I keep finding things that seem important." He had time. He had distance. He had, against his will, been given the 3 seconds. And in that pause, he saw more clearly than he ever had at court. 3 seconds. That's all that stands between you and someone else's instrument. Real guilt survives examination. Manufactured guilt depends on urgency. This is the doctrine. Not a tactic, not a technique, a posture. Every rule before this one is sharper inside it. The ability to identify manufactured guilt requires the pause. The ability to see the loop requires the pause. The ability to recognize DARVO mid-sequence requires the pause. The ability to counter the preemptive strike with a precise question requires the pause. Without the pause, every insight in this video is theory. With it, every interaction becomes navigable. And once you learn to pause, some relationships become impossible to experience the same way again. That is not a side effect. That is the point. Drop this. I am not available for games I didn't agree to play. The guilt reflex is not a flaw. It is a feature of conscience, one of the few mechanisms that keeps human beings accountable to each other. That is what makes it so efficient as a weapon. You cannot remove it. You would not want to. So the only move is not removal. It is recognition. The pause. The 3 questions. The willingness to ask, before you apologize, before you reach toward the warmth, before you smooth it over one more time. Is this mine? And if it is yours, genuinely yours, carry it honestly. That is what conscience is for. But if it isn't, if you examine it and find someone else's hand on the lever, then the most accountable thing you can do is not move. That is not coldness. That is clarity. Real guilt survives the pause. Manufactured guilt depends on the speed. If you've spent a long time inside this, if you develop the pause and begin to see the loop, the DARVO, the preemptive framing with genuine clarity, there is one question this video cannot answer for you. What do you do with the relationships that were built around that reflex? That is a question you carry. And if someone came to your mind while watching this, you already know who you're caring it about.